Nā mi kia koutou, katoa nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. A warm welcome to our future Tairawhiti meeting today. As you can see, it's a small agenda, but with some meaty areas that we will discuss. So let's get into it. I've got apologies from Mayor Ming Foon, Graham Thompson, Karen Finn, Brian Wilson. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, Graham Thompson should be entitled to leave of absence because he is actually at a provincial and sector meeting, so he's not an apology.
Good. And Karen Finn as well. She asked, so apologies, Mayor Ming Foon, Brian Wilson. Moved by Bill Burdett, seconded by Pat Seymour. All in favour? Carried. Pat. And then we have the leave of absence is Graham Thompson and Karen Finn.
I'll move.
Moved by Councillor Seymour, seconded by Councillor Burdett. All in favour? Contrary, carried. So let's move on. Any declarations of interest? Nothing today. We move on to number 3, confirmation of our non-confidential minutes. That is page 5 of 88. Moved by Councillor McLean, seconded by Councillor Foster. Any discussions? Any corrections? If not, I put it to the table. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Let's take a look at our action sheet. Any issues arising? Councillor Seymour.
Yes, thank you. Could we understand what has been, what feedback and what is the process around the Gisborne Yacht Club submission that they made to us?
What number is that?
That is 004 from the 8th of November. If you remember, they were very interested in making their boat ramp more public, or it is public now, but seeking some support from council to upgrade that boat ramp.
Mr. White.
And while people are thinking about it, I had a question about 006 as well.
Through the chair, if I recall, the boat club's request was around council taking over the management of that boat ramp. That hasn't yet been resolved, but Laird Kennedy will be working through that with the yacht club.
Can we ask what the time frame is, please, since they did bring that issue to us in 2008, at November 2018? Can we understand what the time frame is for the discussion with them?
So it's a lease discussion matter, and Laird will be in touch with them in the next week.
Thank you. And the question around the ability to charge heavier fines for their infringement, which is 006. And without getting into the detail, I'm aware of a very large amount of rubbish that went from a residence in town to the beachfront and did come back to us because fortunately our council officers in clearing it did find a letter that identified where it had come from. And it was a deliberate act of removing rubbish from private property to our beachfront. That would be about 2 weeks ago. I don't need to know about the exact one, but it does give us the opportunity to be able to hopefully fine people that do that. And we asked here at this question again some weeks ago, can we look at a greater infringement fine for deliberately disposing of rubbish in the public spaces of this region?
Mr. White. Mr. Zaman.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I've just come in a bit on the end of the question, but I think the question relates to the ability to charge in addition to what's set out under the Litter Act in terms of fines. And so those fees are set in legislation in terms of what can be fined. Council can pursue, if they have information of certain individuals, in terms of cost recovery, but normally it goes through a court process, and council will retrieve that money through the courts. So there's a limit to how much we can fine under the schedule set out.
Thanks very much for that. But why do we then say investigate and report back to council if we know there's another process, or why don't we report that back in written? So that it makes these actual action sheets meaningful. Otherwise, you just put things on there and hopefully we don't notice. But I mean, seriously, if there's going to be action and a report back, when are we going to expect that? Through you, Madam Chair, I'm looking for an answer to that.
Mr.
Because
Zaman.
This is supposed to be a meaningful action sheet, and if things are on here, we either expect it to be completed or it should be written on here in another way.
So in future, can we please make sure everything that's on the action sheet that has got a time frame and a reporting system that works and reports back to who it should report back to? Thank you.
Just a question on the same topic. And through the chair, Mr. Zalman, you've mentioned that costs may be recovered through courts. Is it not possible to charge for cost of recovery and the fine, and they can then challenge us through the courts if they wish to not pay that?
Thank you, through Madam Chair. So it's different on the different acts. Certain fees are set out in schedules, and that's all we can charge in terms of our recovery. And under the Litter Act, that's an amount that we can do. On the Resource Management Act, in terms of other fees, we can pursue individuals, and that's done through a small claims court. So we can go through a cost recovery element, but the fines are limited to how much we can do depending on what it is in the act. So if it's through a discharge under the RMA, say section 15, or a resource consent, we can actually, where there's a breach, we can actually go for full cost of recovery, and the fines are set within a band. Otherwise, it's actually set out in various schedules, and that is the limit. I believe $400 is the maximum fine that we can recoup.
Councillor Akawata Brown.
It is in line with what we're discussing it now. I was just asked a query this week by a resident. Because we're no longer picking up certain plastics, they're not being put out in our waste recycling, etc. Residents' query is, will they get more stickers because there's going to be more rubbish needing to be just put into, I guess, landfill space, or will the charges have to be renegotiated, seeing as we're not picking up those plastics now? So that change has only just happened recently. So residents are querying that space as to how will they be getting more stickers, etc. It's in line with rubbish collection, but I wasn't sure in this space. But it was a query asked of me this week. So I wondered, Nick, if that was considered. Oh, sorry, Andrew.
So if we can just stick to what's on the action sheet.
My apologies, I wasn't sure because it is about rubbish, and I know we're talking charges and fees in regard to those who've thrown rubbish on the beach. My fear is that more people will do that based on not having enough stickers with regard to rubbish they can't put out now.
Okay, any other stuff on the action sheet? Nothing. If that is, we've got a leave of absence, any acknowledgement and tributes, no public deputations today. We do not have extraordinary business, notice of motion, any adjourned business. So I ask everyone to move to page 14, where we will talk about a very important issue, responding to climate change and options put forward by our staff. Mrs. Kohiri, thank you for joining us. Maybe you can just give us a quick outline, take it as read, and then people can start asking questions.
Morena, through the chair, thank you. I'll take the report as read, however, just covering the three options that are provided to you. We're looking for a steer, and obviously there's a preferred option, which we think will probably respond to some of the community matters we have heard, but I think it is best practice, and the rationale is provided for you in the paper around the costs and benefits over each option, and an extra reference that we're hoping to include how we respond as part of our spatial planning exercise as well.
I just had one question when I read it and looked at the three options. What's happening worldwide is that jurisdictions are declaring climate change emergencies. And don't you think that as one of our options, it behoves us to have that and take that step and show that we're serious?
We'd be
just
looking
asking the
for a
staff,
steer
thank
as to the appetite from the table today.
I was just,
you've
I
seen
was just
examples
interested
of-
that it was not included at all. In New Zealand, can we please just have order around the table and respect when other people are talking? So I was just wondering if why it was not even an option when we looked at the options, because it is happening all around New Zealand and around the world. So I just wanted some feedback around that.
Yes, there are examples of other councils. With the workshop we had with councillors, we didn't get a steer that that was the intention, but happy to revise that.
Thank you. Any questions from Councillor Dowsing and then Councillor Cranston?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback I've got about that declaring an emergency, and that is, okay, what are the actions attached to it? I think where we're sitting at the moment with the local government leaders climate declaration, I see some really good actions out of that. And I think, you know, if option 3 does commit us to those actions, then I'm really comfortable to move that. The other thing I'd just like is that the circular economy conference we had, there were some really good learnings out of that. And I'd just like to understand that we're having a really good look at what those learnings were and getting into some of those, because, you know, that's some of the stuff that come out of that, I think would be really remiss if we didn't take up on them. So yeah, happy to move this, and with option 3, under the understanding that we have got actions with the climate declaration.
Thank you. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. The concern I had was how we deliver option 3, and there was no delivery approach for regional climate leadership in here. It didn't really touch on the method or people involved or what that structure would look like. And I guess through the chair, what I'm looking for is a steer on how that may be done, particularly in relation to how it, to the leadership group, and whether that will include industry, because climate change by nature opposes economic drivers and industry. And I wonder how they fit together, because I wouldn't want to see the steering group made up of industry lobbyists, or, you know, and so I was wondering if there's any thought being given to that delivery of climate leadership yet.
Through the chair, on page 21, and I'm reminded around development of an action plan, and then on page 21 at the bottom of the table there, affordability in terms of its reference as medium, that the ability to fund actions and implement the plan will require consideration in the preparation of the next LTP. So the ability to develop an action plan is the stage we're at. The ability to implement it would likely be considered in the next LTP.
I guess that leads directly to my concern that council has shown in the past a lack of leadership in places because of our own economic levers. This building, for example, has single glazing and didn't meet the original targets for the energy efficiency that we were hoping to achieve out of this building. So we know that there are levers that oppose pure climate leadership. And my concern here is that when we move this forward, it needs to have teeth, and it needs to be led by people who are not incentivized or conflicted by those mechanisms. And so I'm all for what is being proposed, but it's how it's delivered that I don't see in the paper yet, and that is actually my concern. Thank you.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. I support option 3, but I would have thought, and it's not inconsistent with what Councillor Dowsing says, is option 2. It says development of a council emissions inventory to understand our carbon footprint. I would have thought we would have done that by now, because we started talking about this kind of thing several years ago, and we went into the process of looking at efficient energy heating within our buildings and had quite a substantial conversation. So all of those 3 bullet points there under option 2, which would be carried through to option 3, I would have thought would have been basic things that we would be doing as an organisation. With respect to the carbon emergency declaration, if we've all read the papers that have gone on behind that, and even ECAN and their very highly regarded CE, says they have no teeth. It's just a mere statement. So I don't think we should get excited about actually adopting the emergency statement. It's more important that we do the things that we're talking about in here for the time being. And for those who were at the spatial plan workshop the other day, we did support moving some terminology around the assessment of climate change. I can see one of our gentlemen in the room up higher in a priority, because we can't start talking to our community until we understand potentially the impacts of climate change. And some of it was around mitigation or potential relocation, which, you know, that's a long way down the track. But we did endorse looking at the impacts of climate change in this region. So we need data better than we've got, and we certainly need data about our own behaviours as a unitary authority. So I support option 3, but I certainly don't support us fussing off to support the emergency legislation. Emergency statement, I beg your pardon, it's not legislation.
So just if I might make a comment through the chair, picking up on the questions or concerns raised by Councillor Dowsing, that the delivery mechanism, how we get there, will be our next steps. It's fair to say that this council has been behind some of the others in terms of advancing that discussion around climate change and delivery, and how we feed that through in terms of our other plans. So we're playing some catch up in this space. We're also, through the spatial plan, having those discussions around resilience, hazards, development areas as well. So alongside with how we deliver it, getting more data, to Councillor Seymour's point, but also an education process for the community. So very much engaging them around what does this actually mean for you, where you live, and how you're going to adapt to climate change, because the conversation really is about adaptation now. Then we will be able to come up with a program of work. So we will need to bring that back to keep you engaged. But around the industry comments too, a lot of the, nationally, a lot of the industry are up to speed in terms of what's happening, and looking at how they can diversify and be better, do better business, because that's the way the world's going. So they're aware of that and can add value to the space. So I don't see the process that council officers would own. It's very much a community conversation around how we move this forward.
Councillor Akuato-Brown.
Thank you so much for this paper, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss it, because I think if there's a group of people that are really passionate about the space, it's our youth. Young people marched, and a lot of social media discussions feature a lot of our young people questioning the leaders of I guess, the nation, if not their region. So it does behove us to certainly step up and be part of that conversation in its truest sense. And so I would like to ensure that, I guess, youth, their voice would be very, pertinent. And I know in our engagement spaces we're becoming better at broadening the context of who's there. As you've said in the reports, there are other councils that have moved, and it's heartening to know there are others we can look to see what they're doing as well. Our region suffers, significant soil erosion, all the issues, flooding and all these factors, and even in recent discussions around land use. So, we are in a space where, to use the young lady that's been touted as the climate change advocate of the world, a crisis in a way, because we tend to look at these issues in isolation of sorts, but it's time with that spatial planning, debate, discussion, dialogue, that we actually do show leadership. We do discuss what we can do, what we're already doing, because we are able to educate, we are able to inform, but we're also able to do it in our own, space of our own lives and be a part of this. So I'm following on from Councillor Dowsing. If there's more strength to what we can do as councillors, but also as a unitary authority, being really clear what we can do now, adding to that, and obviously having those discussions will be certainly a leadership forum forward. But I would just love to, again, have those youth that are passionate about this be in that space as well. But I agree with the option that you've given to us, and as I said, look forward to constantly discussing further this issue for our region.
Councillor Burdett, microphone.
Madam Chair. Interesting having heard the CEO's comments and one or two around the table. A couple of times I've been asked what the difference is between climate change and the vagaries of weather and how council are going to define that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wharehinga and then Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. I definitely support option 3. However, I do also support us making a principled statement in regards to the climate emergency. I think as leaders, we do need to make principled statements. That helps us give staff direction in regards to the work plan and what we need to be deciding on in regards to the actions moving forward. Otherwise, if we're waiting for what the actions look like, we'll be wasting staff resource and maybe a direction that we don't want as council. And I think that particularly on the East Coast, which is quite susceptible to the future climate change effects, I think that we actually do need to make that principled statement, that principled position on behalf of our region. So I'm in support of option 3, but I am also definitely in support of us having a principled position that there is a climate emergency.
Councillor Dunn.
Yes, thank you. I decided that this decision is another insurance policy for our region. There's a risk that our house is going to burn down, so we carry house insurance. There's a risk that we could have a car crash, so we have car insurance. There's a risk that we could get serious illness, and again, if we can, we have health insurance. Given that there's a reasonable risk of disruptive climate change, any sensible person should decide to act. It's just insurance. So I think it's a very sensible decision, and I'll second the motion from Councillor Cranston.
Thank you for that.
A robust strategy is to assume that climate change is happening and to respond. We don't need to be totally certain that the climate scientists have got it right. The strategy is a good one, even if they've got it wrong. If it turns out that climate change doesn't happen, all of the steps we take are still worthwhile for our region, and I think that's the mindset we should take. These aren't my words. I'm actually reiterating the author and the visionary technology. WTF, what's the future and why it's up to us? This is what Tim O'Reilly is advising all of the corporations around the world. Take the action anyway, because it's going to be worthwhile in the end. I'm actually thinking of our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren when I make this decision, because the decisions we make today create their future. And we've got to make the right decisions today. That's why I support option 3 and second it.
So after listening to everyone around the table, even though I feel that our council has not been proactive in that area, and I would like for us to declare a climate change emergency, obviously there's not the appetite around the table. I just wanted to say that we also should take into account this is a moving piece of work, and this is who's currently sitting around the table. We have an election in 4 months as well, and the composition of people might change, so it will be a new discussion going forward as well. But what we're saying today is that we will go with option 3. We move to option 3, regional climate leadership, moved by Councillor Cranston, seconded by Councillor Dunn. Anyone else wants to make a comment? Councillor Wharehinga.
I did want to ask the mover and the seconder if they were happy to include us making a principle-based position that there is a climate emergency.
I think that's a discussion.
Yes, I'd like to, if it's okay, I would like to move that as 3.
Who's the mover? The mover is Councillor Cranston.
Yeah. As the mover, I'm not comfortable with that because it wasn't added, it wasn't part of the paper, so I don't know the implications of that.
Is it okay if we have it on the action sheet for something for staff to come back with in regards to climate emergency? I actually don't think there needs to be any kind of work because we're making a principle-based position, personally. That's what I think. It's kind of putting the cart before the horse if we're asking staff to come back with a paper about what our principle-based position should be.
At this stage,
So if the mover is not willing to do that, I would like to add a third recommendation that we do make, that Gisborne District Council makes a principle-based position that there is a climate-based emergency.
so we've got a mover for option for on page 15 for number 1 and 2, Councillor Cranston and Councillor Dunn. Then we have Councillor Wharehinga moved a number 3 to signal that we are indicating that there is a climate change emergency. I will second that. So
Can we understand what you expect?
it's just a principled statement showing what direction we're moving towards.
Can you indicate what you expect to happen as a result of that? Because while the statement's been made by a couple of councils, not a lot, and others, council officers have indicated that it is meaningless because nothing is going to change.
Through the chair, so if you include the inclusion of so if we include a recommendation that you adopt around a principled statement stating a climate change of emergency, that is a clear statement to council officers that this needs to be prioritised and that we need to get on with the work. And it's sending a statement to the community in terms of how important you see this issue. As you've heard from other councils, in terms of the weight that's given to it, at the moment there's no NPS, but you can, with a carbon amendment, carbon zero bill coming in, that's a clear signal nationally that there is an emergency. So we're likely to see more regulation in this space. But yeah, I think it gives a clear direction and guidance to staff as to the priority if you include that.
Madam Chair, I'd like to speak against it because I think we're in saying that it's going to give a signal to staff that it's an emergency is not consistent with everything else that we do in here. Council officers action activity based on a report or based on a request. We don't go around saying X, Y, Z or the walkway is an emergency, so we need the council officers to respond to the fact that it's an emergency. It's just a play on words. And I think that approving 1 and 2 gives a clear direction to our community that we seek activity to happen, that there is more information coming out of the climate change bill. That's exactly what we respond to in the normal course of council activity. We move to reflect legislation or NESs or whatever, but we don't actually need to make a statement that we don't know what the meaning of it is in effect. So I'll be voting.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to speak? Councillor Dunn.
Yes, what I'm grappling with is I kind of feel that the decision we've just made is by default saying that we have a climate change emergency upon us. We are taking it seriously, and that decision is making it. There's a lot of climate change policy existing already, and a lot of our regulations that we have. For example, the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement says that we have to take a precautionary approach. So there's a whole lot of mechanisms inside our policies at the moment where we should be taking this stance as it is, but we haven't been. So I can't see how making that declaration adds anything over and above the decision that we've just made. So I'm kind of sitting on the fence and I'm just uncertain. And I think clarity around that would be quite good.
And just to clarify, when I started this discussion, I was saying we're going to hear from around the table. What is the appetite around the table? Obviously, there's not an appetite around the table. There are some people that feel that way, and that's fine. But so it's at the end of the day, we vote on it and we get what we get.
Yes, so it's supplementary. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm saying I don't know what the benefits are over and above what we've already decided to do.
So the CEO just said we could just out of option 3 have an action to look going forward now that we are getting proactive around it, if that might be a next step. And what it means and what it would, like you say, it needs to be teeth, not just a piece of paper.
Thank you. I was just going to state that we have no delivery mechanism in place yet for option 3, for the the third piece anyway, the leadership on climate change, and that may be an outcome from our leadership on climate change. This is to put in place a mechanism for researching and investigating climate change, and to come back to us with a proposal on how we should move forward in that space. So I feel like the right process is being taken right now, which is to enter into investigation, and then if declaring a climate emergency in our region has benefits, that will come back through this investigation cycle, and will be part of the regional leadership piece going forward. So I think that we have a opportunity to investigate that further down the line. And today the recommendation is solid.
So Councillor Wharehinga, if you're happy, I'm happy that it would just, at this stage, be an action out of option 3. So if you withdraw number 3, and staff would take that as an action, like Councillor Dowsing said, with the work happening out of option 3, then see where we go from there.
The reason why I wanted to include it was actually the higher level thing was actually making a statement on behalf of and to our community about the position that this table takes in regards to climate change. We've had many papers over my last 2 terms indicating the effects that the massively severe effects that climate change will have at Te Tairawhiti. The overflowing of our rivers, the eroding of our beaches, the impact that it will have on our shores, all of the impact that it will have on us to be able to provide water for the region and for people to be able to provide water for themselves. We've had so much information, all in bits and pieces, actually coming across our table to say enough to say to me that this is an emergency, and further than that, enough for people out in the community to signal that this is an emergency for them. And I think that we still need to take a principle-based position reflecting the realities of our community on behalf of our community. Because the thing is that if we take this off, then for me, it's like we're saying that currently it's not an emergency for climate change, is not an emergency for our region. I can guarantee you, if anybody from our community asked you face to face if it was an emergency, you would probably say yes. Most of the people around this table would probably say yes. So I think we need to publicly say yes at this table and in this manner. Further than that, I hear Councillor Dunn's point in regards to the fact that in current policy, climate change is being reflected. The majority of those policies that only relate to environment, if we make this position, then we'll need to factor in climate change across all of the things that we need to be thinking about, building regulations, all of that other stuff that's outside of the environmental kind of things. And that's not what we're doing right now. We need to be making that position as a council. I do hear that we need information and we need papers in order to be able to make decisions. I don't feel that this is a decision of we are going to do X, Y, and Z. This is a decision to say, this is our position. Okay, now based on our position, staff, you now need to do X, Y, and Z. I feel we are I don't like to use kind of superior and inferior terms, but I feel that we are the dog and we need to wag the tail. We need to kind of say, this is how we want things to go. This is where we want to move to in this direction. And staff needs to bring that back to us. So I think that making the statement, a very clear statement, does 2 major things. One, states to our community that this is our position on behalf of those many community members out there that have said this and will probably say this to us if this does get voted down. And 2, it informs staff across the organisation about what we're going to do, position staff, across the organisation about how we're going to respond to climate change. And that's the work that comes back to us when we make that position about climate change being an emergency.
Madam Chair, can I suggest you put the paper and put it separately? 1, 2.
If I can please take you to page 15. I have got a mover and a seconder for option 1 and 2, number 1 and 2, moved by Councillor Cranston, seconded by Councillor Dunn. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Division number 3 is moved by councillor Wharehinga, seconded by councillor Stoltz, includes a principled statement on a climate change.
Will you put that? I haven't actually spoken on this third one.
Go for
Can you read it out so we do know what it all is, just like you're going to?
Everyone else is there. Like,
Includes a principled statement on a climate change emergency. Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, I think where I'm fighting, I think going around this table, there's really good recognition that there's urgency. And I think the paper does say urgency. I'm just fighting the difference between urgency and emergency. Emergency is actually do something right now. Don't worry about the cost. Don't worry about the resources. Get it done. Urgency, we definitely need to have a recognition of that. It's an urgent situation. I'm just uncertain about what the word emergency was. So the work that's going to come out of this will give us that definition.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Just a point of clarity, you did put that motion and it was successful, so I don't know why we're going to division now. It should have been asked for before the motion was.
That is true. I have got a recommendation on page 15 that was added by councillor Wharehinga. Is that possible, Heather?
No.
I'm talking to Heather.
We've moved and.
Okay, there will be no division.
Yeah.
I have got number 3 on page 15 is, what's that? Yeah, but we're moving on to number 3. We're taking them separately. Okay, people, relax, sit in your chairs, deep breathing. We are moving on.
Can I just get some clarity, so I'm confused? The recommendation is saying to make a principled statement on climate change. What is the statement?
That it is
What statement are we making? This is a climate change emergency. That's the statement we are declaring. Yeah.
So the wording is on page 3, on page 15, number 3 includes a principled statement on a climate change emergency. I have a mover in councillor Wharehinga, a seconder in councillor Stolt, all in favour. Aye. Contrary? Not carried. Loss. Okay, everyone, if we can move on to...
She will follow through with this work that she said start
Yes,
with.
Phil. Yes, my friend. Okay, we're moving on to page 28. Rongofokata Iwi Trust and Gisborne District Council Joint Action Plan. Who is going to speak? Kate, are you also there? So, Kate, are you going to give us a little synopsis? Or?
So further to the 2 governance engagements that you've had with the Rongofokata Iwi Trust, you will recall at the last meeting out at Manutuke, there was agreement to develop a shared action plan on mutual interests. There's a table in the report that aligns some of our council Tairawhiti piritahi obligations that we've committed to in the long-term plan. So we've tried to find alignment between the aspirations that were presented to you by Rongofokata Iwi Trust in the page 32. And they're listed on the left. And so we've put alignment with what your council obligations are. So really we're looking for agreement to develop a shared action plan that will be the topic of discussion at your next governance with Rongofokata Iwi Trust.
Thank you. Councillor Burdett.
Madam Chair, I'll move this and speaking to it. This is conforming to what decisions we've made with other iwi in the district. And I think this is the way forward, personally, for us as a council.
Thank you. Any other discussions, questions? Councillor Dunn seconded it. Councillor Foster.
I'm totally supportive of this. We've been working with Makata for quite a while, and we've also got involved with our wastewater management committee, which has been really, really successful, and the relationship has just grown. So any relationship building that we can do with our iwi partners, I'm totally in favour of.
Right, so if there are no other discussions, I take you to page 29. We've got number 1 and 2. Notes the report, and 2A develops a joint action plan with Ronga Whakata Iwi Trust, moved by Councillor Bedette, seconded by Councillor Dunn. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you. Next, we move on to the beautiful Titirangi Restoration Project update. Who will speak to that? Mr. White? Seconded by, moved by Councillor Dunn, seconded by Councillor Cranston. Dowsing. You do, and you're chirping from the same side. So obviously a lot of work happening in that area. Anything you want to update us that's not in the paper?
Through you, Madam Chair, this is really just an update report for the committee. We do the regular reporting through the major projects report, but there's been so much going on with Titirangi in terms of the restoration program that we thought a more in-depth summary would be valuable. I think the key points in the report is most of the work has actually been done in terms of the existing program around track work, with some small minor work still to be done around furniture and signage. We'll be working through the bilingual signage program with that. And just reiterating that significant risk that we have with this particular site around weeds. So the huge work that's been done around the revegetation, we still continue to have that risk around weed control, and the fire Titirangi program has been exemplary, I think, in terms of being able to manage those sorts of risks. So it's actually a really happy project. It's been going really well over the last 5 years, and I just think this report really shows that.
Thank you for that. Any observations or questions from Mr. White? Larry?
Yeah, I've got, yeah, I'm really passionate about Titirangi, obviously. I'm on the seaward side of it, and it's like my second home, all the tracks over the hill, and the whole upgrade of the manga since the removal of the pine trees has been absolutely fantastic, and the commitment and the work of the community that's gone into the weed spraying and the weeding, the planting has been really, really cool. I do have a question. There's a couple of things up on the hill at the moment. We knew that the sail on top of the Tupapa sign got removed a while back. I would imagine that's going to be replaced sometime soon. That's one question. Pardon? Oh, yeah, well, is that sail going to be replaced on the Tupapa sign right on top of the hill?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, any
And
other?
when? And the other thing is too, the maintenance program on the hill for the future is a little bit uncertain. I just want to make sure that, or guarantees that there is going to be money sought for future maintenance, and the program is going to be ongoing, because once you develop these tracks and all the different activities that are happening up there, obviously the maintenance bill is going to be higher. So I'm just going to make sure that we can maintain what we've got up there, and the additions that we do to it are going to be upkept.
Through the chair, I think that's a really good question. It's a really good question. So you're right. The more development we do, the more pressure that puts on our unscheduled maintenance budget. And through the Community Development Services Committee, we've been talking about that at length over the last few meetings. But I think, you know, when you look at the balance of it, we've got the revegetation program. We will reduce our cost around weed maintenance as the native vegetation creates the canopy. So that allow us to put more resource into other sorts of activities as well. When we think about the more aspirational stuff in our partnership with Ngāti Onioni around extending the Titirangi restoration program, that will probably raise some questions around funding, but we also have funding partners as well that we're working with, such as Department of Conservation and other central government funds as well. Tourism Infrastructure Fund, Provincial Growth Fund has put significant dollars into the Titirangi Summit. So, you know, we're going with a positive mindset to continue the good work that's already been done.
Go.
The demolition of the observatory and the landscaping of the top of the hill was proposed to be done before October. Is that still on track to be done before?
So that's not actually part of the restoration project. That's a separate project, but I'm quite happy to talk about that. Yes, it is still planned to be completed before October. So at the moment, we're in the resource consent application phase with that, and we have also almost completed the tender process for the demolition contract as well. So, so we're well on track for that project.
Thank you. I saw some other hands here. Councillor Akuata Brown and then Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a query. I appreciate we're doing a whole bunch of stories, narratives in this space, and I find it a little bit, well, not disappointing, but the fact that one of the tracks is just called the bowl track. And I appreciate that that was perhaps the shape and the framework in its initial, but would there be considerations to tracks having, well, heritage or cultural significant names in a space moving forward? And again, telling the story of Te Tirangi, because I know there's a lot of work happening in this space. So I want to say thank you to everyone involved for all the work. It's a beautiful maunga and it's coming together in a beautiful space. So that was just my question, was around the tracks having those kind of significant names.
I'd go further than to say consideration of cultural and heritage names to commitment to cultural and heritage names, and we take that leadership from our partner Ngāti Onioni, so we're working with them over that at the moment.
Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask about and make some comments about the weed management. I noticed that was kind of the big, you mentioned, and it's also in the paper, it's the biggest risk. On just generally though, is that under control? Was there kind of decline, or is it too soon in the cadetship program to actually be able to track those numbers?
I feel that it's under control. I felt that way. I think it's been marginal for ever since we did the re-veg work, or the main re-veg work, because I always think back to the original project manager's comment that this is a veritable nest of every single weed species that you could possibly find. It's different to other restoration areas because we have such a high concentration of different weed species there. And every once in a while I'll look at different places on the maunga and I'll see what look like infestations of pampas coming through, or my most recent one is moth plant coming through on the Rakaitani site. But we respond to those sorts of things really quickly through the fire program. So I would say, yes, it's under control, and as the canopy closes around our revegetation work, it will become easier.
Thank you, Mr. White. Just one other comment I think this would be a really good idea coming up into the summer. We have a lot of people going up and down over Te Tirangi for the Everest Challenge. Somebody brought up kind of halfway through last year that it would have been a really cool idea to have incorporated that with some kind of weed management stuff, of people just being, pulling weeds, or kind of working with Sports Gisborne and a marketing kind of media campaign. Because what we've seen in the past is that people really love Te Tirangi. They'll dedicate their time to go up there planting trees and help out with all sorts of management kind of things. And I think it's a really ideal time to possibly work with Sports Gisborne, work with the fitness community out in Gisborne, to be able to possibly be something that we can kind of maybe get some traction on. I feel a lot of people, well, it might not be everybody, but there's a significant number of people going up and down our maunga every single day. So I think that might be a great idea. Not my idea, someone else's idea in the community. Can't remember who it was. If you remember who you are, I'll show you a copy.
Thanks for that. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With our storytelling, I've seen it highlighted recently that we've got a new name for our city, and I know it's not the problem of ours, but is that going to be righted at some stage and call us the City of Gisborne from that storytelling position?
So I suspect you're referring to an issue that was raised by an individual walking up the hill.
Yeah.
So no, at this stage, we're not planning to do anything about that. I think to react on an individual's comments versus, but it was a collaborative process that the iwi developed. It's their stories, it's their expression, it's their interpretation. So there's no intention for us to have made any change unless there is a will around the council table to do so, in which case we would need to talk to iwi about that because it's their story.
Can that possibly be done? Have that discussion? Or are we changing our name to Tairawhiti Kiwa?
So it's a storyboard, it's not an official gazetted name, and it's a storyboard that we have developed from their perspective. So my comment, I don't, so there's a couple of things in here. There is a perspective that was raised from an individual through an email that hasn't come into the public domain around that discussion. So to react on that issue would not be due process. The second part is that they are stories that are owned by iwi, it is their perspective. So for us, we don't own those stories. We supported and created the environment for that to happen. So if council took issue with that, then council should resolve around this table to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. There was someone to the left. I think it was Councillor Cranston, yes. Trying to speak.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of interest in the Maunga now. So I just wondered, I mean, knowing what's happening with cycle at the moment, whether that's absolutely off the table or whether there's any potential there to make some sort of cycle tracks going through the mountain, because it's actually where it's at in this country now, things like that. I mean, you just got to see the Fox Street now. I mean, you've got to queue up to get on that pathway now. It's absolutely spectacular what's happening there. So people are now looking at the moment thinking, well, you know, the potential there. I know it was a discussion point for a while, and I just wonder whether it's absolutely off the table, whether there's potential to look at that and seeing if it can be developed along the lines of cycle. Other track is the issue with Sport Gisborne and the going over the Maunga and weeding. I think that's awesome. That's something that Brett and I can take up with Sport Gisborne, because I think there could be some good out of that. And as far as the iwi board stating what they want it to be called, that's fine. You know, it's their board, you know.
Thanks. Anyone else wants to
Can
comment?
I get a...
Oh, yes. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. So you'll recall that council adopted the management plan for Titirangi Maunga 3 years ago, maybe, and it was pretty clear in that management plan policy that mountain biking was not considered to be an appropriate activity on the Maunga. It doesn't mean that it's off the table forever, but when you talk about the Whataupoko mountain bike track development, that I think there is significant investment being put into mountain biking around the city at the moment, mostly by our mountain bike club, which is a really good way to do it. And I think, you know, when you think about the potential to extend that beyond the existing tracks and their commitment to do so, I think we're heading in the right direction. But you're right that cycling is a huge growth area that we should be responding to.
I just wanted to ask a supplementary question to what Councillor Cranston asked. My understanding was that the reserve plan for Titirangi did not allow for mountain biking there. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah. Councillor Foster and then Councillor Burdett, and then I'll put it to the floor.
Yeah, just one more thing. I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Eastland Port. If anyone's been around to Kaiti Beach recently, there's a whole new track being developed along the side of the road, the log truck road. The whole road's being developed at the moment. There's a huge amount of investment going on to the resealing of it. But the new track that's going through, it'll be finished, I think, by the end of July. It's absolutely awesome. And there's a part where they've had to put a proper bridge, and I don't think they anticipated that to start with. But they've gone ahead and done the investment, and it's going to be absolutely awesome. And it's going to be a huge connection, a great asset to accessing Kaiti Beach, and a safe entranceway as well because of the log truck activity. But this actually it's really beautiful, and it takes you right off the road and through the bush and just and meanders through. It looks so cool. So I'd really like to take my hat off to Eastern Port for that investment. It's actually a great addition.
Thank you for that. Councillor Burdett.
I look rather enviously at Oneone and council's relationship. When you think about the history of Titirangi, the trees and all the rest of it, the hassles we had, if you get two groups working together, area and council, and the development that's gone on over there, it's very successful, and people are talking to one another all the time.
Right. So I have got a mover in Councillor Dunn and a seconder in Councillor Dowsing. I will put it to us on page 36. Note the contents of this very thorough report. Thank you, Mr. White. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. We will break for a coffee now because there will be a bit of discussion around the spatial plan. So let's have a 15-minute break, 10 past. Before we move on, we will be on page 54. I just want to take this time to talk a little bit about one of our employees way back that has passed on. We should have done it with our acknowledgement and tribute. So I just would like to talk about Boydie Swan. He was employed by GDC for 45 years, good man, and he was employed as a council surveyor. So I just want us to take this time to think of his family and also just remember Boydie for the man he was and also for the work he done for our community. Okay, councillors, we move to page 54. We will talk about our update on the Tairawhiti 2050 spatial plan. We've got Yannick and Hannah and Joe and the team here to wow us. No pressure, Yannick. And this is just a noting report, so we take it as read. And then any questions to Yannick?
I came down to the land use one. It was well attended and actually well facilitated. However, given that the spatial plan will affect a wider community, I think we have to, it behoves us as a council to do more consultation in terms of the wider communities. I was at the ones in the northern area and there was certainly interest, but the detail that was put in front of us when I came to Gisborne was very, very good and staff did a good job. I think personally that we need to go back to our communities and extrapolate that out so that they fully understand what we're on when we talk about 30 years out.
Thank you for that.
Through the chair, I can respond to Councillor Boudet's suggestion. We will indeed take the spatial plan back to our rural communities, in particular up the coast, and work through some of the details of that project.
Thank you. Any other observations, questions? If not, do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Arkwright-Brown, seconded by Councillor Wharehenga. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Now we move on. Thank you, Yannick. I will sit back now and watch the presentation. Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd first like to thank the councillors who attended the last advisory group session that we had, where we went through the policy framework, which was largely an outcome of the stakeholder engagement we've had so far. And it's okay, I'd like to take this committee through that material to further that discussion and to get some further feedback so we can take that on board and we can start to build the plan. So just first off, if I can just speak.
Microphone.
Sorry. Just first off, if I can just speak to the process that we'd like to undertake in the policy development. Firstly, what's really, really important is that we have a really good understanding of the issues or the challenges or the opportunities in front of us. That is the platform with which we use to build our plan. And then the idea is that we take those challenges and then we think really, really carefully about what it is we're trying to achieve. What are our aspirations? What are the outcomes that we'd like to see in place in 2050? From there, it's a launching pad to really think about how we get there. So we set in place our objectives or our outcomes, and then we think about how we get there. What are the key moves? What are the directions? What are the actions that we need to put in place to achieve those goals? And the last step is really about testing those actions. The filter is the idea of saying, okay, do these directions and actions actually set about achieving our goals? The idea of sequencing is the notion that some actions are required to happen first to allow other actions to be undertaken. So we have a sequencing of our actions to achieve our outcomes. And Prioritization is really about saying, where's the low-hanging fruit? What's the stuff that we can undertake immediately to get the best value for money? What are some of the transformative projects that we can undertake? So that's the kind of the policy thinking that we are promoting here and will undertake. So just in terms of the first step, lining up our challenges with our outcomes. Here is a list here. I'm not sure whether you guys can read them well enough, but in terms of resilient communities, our challenges are around natural hazards and infrastructure. So resilience to the effects of climate change, the impacts of climate change effects on private and public property. How do we adapt to climate change? In terms of infrastructure, it's the same broad question. How do we coordinate infrastructure in greenfields areas? How do we manage capacity for population growth that we're expecting to occur over the next 30 years? How do we ensure a compact urban form? Well, is that something that we want? And how we spread the costs of infrastructure over time as well, knowing full well that infrastructure is expensive. Based on those challenges, we have a series of outcomes around resilience that are up on there. So the first one is really start of 10. Our region's resilience to climate change effects has increased through long-term adaptation, planning and risk management. Our stormwater, wastewater, drinking water and flood drainage infrastructure sustains the health and well-being of our communities. And lastly, Tairawhiti is a carbon neutral region, and that reflects the advisory group's interest in having objectives and outcomes which are aspirational and which are bold as well. So there's some thinking to do in that space, but we're quite interested in your thoughts around the lineup between the challenges and the outcomes for these themes. So we have any comments on this page?
Thank you, Yannick. Just hearing you say that aspirational in our recent discussion around climate change, that would be what that statement is about, as being aspirational and bold. If we make a public statement, because when I read that bullet point 2 on after 13 note, climate change is one of the greatest issues we face. So I'm just wanting to you ask in a leadership space for a real strong stance. That would be a real, because from the spatial planning, it became apparent that it was from our community's voices, a strong stance was needed. So having a strong statement would sit with that, wouldn't it? That shows that leadership in those outcomes. Would you agree? Thank you.
I guess I've been struggling with the topic of climate change all week with this paper and with some of the discussion around transfer of pastoral farming to forestry that's going on in the media at the moment. And one worry I have is that when we make statements like carbon neutral region, actually we may end up as a carbon bowl for the country, essentially, where we have far more carbon credits available in our region because people are investing in forestry here and we don't have the industry to offset it, which sounds like a positive change, but it isn't necessarily a positive change in terms of mitigating climate change. So I think that we need, through our leadership, which we just promoted earlier today, to make sensible consideration of whether just a carbon measurement is a viable measure. We talked a little bit about this, Yannick and I, on whether we need to measure social, cultural, environmental and economical values within the entire framework of this. And I think that's another area where it's a bit of a blunt tool, just measuring carbon. Thank you.
I didn't remember that one coming up, drinking water security for our rural communities. Is there, what's the insecurity that they recognise? I mean, you've got 700 houses out at Wainu that have got rainwater coming off their roofs, and that feels to most of Wainu like a secure drinking water community. So what's the difference there?
Through the chair, it's something that we have recognised as a challenge in the East Coast communities in particular around Ruatoria in terms of access to drinking water. It's a steer that we've taken from our environmental services team. They're aware that there are some issues around access to fresh water. In particular, the cost of refilling tanks up the coast is prohibitive. And so it's really about supporting access, especially during the summer months when freshwater supplies are low. And continue to provide for the well-being of future generations. Do we have comment?
I guess I'll reiterate a point that I was going to make earlier, but around the freshwater and how to improve our water quality and to ensure sustainability of supply. In that space, for me, it's planning for our current environment and the current state of affairs, as well as long term. For example, at the moment, most of our planning around water supply is contingent on MAR being successful. Have we made enough headway into planning if MAR is unsuccessful? Because that is our current status. We know that it's in decline, and are we planning for if it is unsuccessful?
I want to comment too, because after attending all of those meetings with the spatial plan, there were some really strong directions that came out of it. And one that I was really encouraged with was having a 50-kilometre buffer zone of forestry around our Poverty Bay Flats, because there's a lot of connotations to pine being close to very fertile soils. It's a toxic plant and everything. So having a 50-metre or 50-kilometre buffer would certainly give our Poverty Bay Flats some good protection. So I think we can't just the whole trying to protect the Poverty Bay Flats and the quality of the fertile soil there is imperative for the future of this region. And that comes with housing development and all the different encroaching onto that area as well. We basically need to have a clear line where we can encourage more development and not.
Yeah, which begs the question now that you've raised that. In terms of the spatial plan and looking forward, is it our role to determine who can and who cannot make commercial investment? I mean, I follow on what you're saying. In terms of forestry, it's a pity Pat's not here. It's a little overwhelming at present because government are there. They had a meeting in Ruatoria yesterday. They have a million tree program. And I guess at the end of the day, there would be a few who would line up and say, yeah, we'll do this. But the issue is, it's a huge industry. We know that. It employs lots of people and provides plenty of wealth into the region. But vis-a-vis pastoral farming vis-a-vis what you talk about the flats. What is our role in this apart from advising, recommending? Are we going to be in a position 20 or 30 years out to say, no, we don't want this to happen? That's the real crux to the whole thing, the commercial investment.
Yannick, would you like to comment on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, only just to say, I guess at this stage, the exercise is a conversation that we're having with the community as a whole, and to allow those voices and those ideas and opinions to be had. And then we can consider, I guess, the terrain of those opinions and those thoughts and design a way forward.
And supplementary to that, Madam Chair, in terms of our fresh water, improve water quality and ensure a suitable supply, sustainable supply. For those who have been sitting around this table a long time, remember when there was, the mayor actually brought to this table the question of a water supply in Tairawhiti. They were going to tap into streams. Suddenly, after they'd done the investment, because there was a government subsidy there, it was going to be far too expensive. Then we moved to the tanks and we turned it down. So that, I mean, those are the sorts of questions that, in terms of the spatial plan, what specifically is our role?
Thank you, CEO, and then Councillor Dowsing.
So through the chair, and so that discussion that was had around forest farming, conversion forests into forestry, there are a number of, and going to Councillor Burdett's question, your primary mechanism for being able to restrict business is through your rules. And so if through this process your visions articulated over the next 30 years, and then we go through a district or unitary plan change process, that is the place within which that happens. Now, I'm not sure from whether there has been the case practice where a council has outrightly been able to even exclude businesses, but you can do so by rules. But that's a big call to make. So you need to be absolutely clear that that's what the community want, which is why you consult and you go through a process when you set your new rule.
And I just wanted to carry on from that. To me, I look at it from a different angle. We're not trying to restrict certain stuff. We're trying to encourage the businesses that align with what we want to see for our region. So it's more a carrot than a stick, and slowly you will move in that direction, but it is setting that clear vision. That is where we want to go, and this is what we support getting there. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to talk to the same point, and I think it's beautifully written there under soils, which is need to protect soils of Poverty Bay Flats. It's not need to protect industry. It's to ensure that there's no exploitation of those soils, that there's no exploitation of our water sources, that the industry that operates there has the same goals as we do, which is that those soils can be used generationally and can continue to be used throughout, into the future of Tairawhiti, so writing it as protecting the soils of Poverty Bay Flats is the appropriate council position.
Thank you. Anything else, Yannick? Councillor Akwata Brown, you want to make a comment?
I think it would be wonderful to see need to protect soils of Prosperity Bay Flats because they are quite a prosperous space. But anywho, my question is, and I'm cognizant of the person sitting next to me is a coastal scientist. And so when it says gaps in our understanding of the coastal environment, Yannick, can you just give us a little bit more detail to that statement? Bearing in mind, again, I know there are experts in this field, but what does that mean?
Through the chair, well, firstly, what we do understand about the coastal environment in terms of landscape values dates back to 1995 when we had a landscape study undertaken. There is an opportunity to review the findings of that report, which incidentally informs a lot of the rules that we have in our Tairawhiti Resource Management Plan. So that's over 20 years old, and so we need to take a look at those values and to refresh them. And as well as we've largely focused on land-based research, and there are opportunities to look at the coastal domain in terms of research as well, and see whether there are any further values that we need to include in our coastal plan.
Okay, last questions.
Yeah, not really a question, but kind of just thinking off the hoof here. If, I mean, fresh water is such an issue in that, how would we work with things that are happening to ensure that we can give quite good direction? What I'm thinking of is something like Hikurangi Cannabis. I mean, their presentation at the Super Economy showed quite a huge building with a huge roof area. So that's going to be up the coast. Would there be a possibility to work with them and say, hey, you guys need to collect the water off this roof, and it could be a resource for that region? Because the water that could be collected off a roof area, which I saw in their presentation, could be an enormous quantity, but it might not necessarily something that's even in their thought processes. But if when they come in wanting the risk, hey, have you thought about this? And, you know, it could be an opportunity for them as well. So, you know, just they could well be. Yeah. Thanks.
No, just an observation. Observation, yeah. Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm mindful of the time that we have for this presentation. We do have further slides and further discussion, but may I suggest that we organise another time where we can workshop this in detail? I guess for the purpose of this meeting, it's enough to say we've got a policy framework in place. We can share this presentation and the findings, and then organise another time.
Thanks a lot for that, Yannick. So if you go to page 66, I will move the recommendation notes the report, seconded by Councillor Burdett. All in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you. We now move on to our major projects report on page 66. That was page 54, yeah. It was page 54 that we moved. Did we pass the motion? No. Good. Page 66. Major projects report. I take the report as read. Thank you for a very thorough update on where we are at. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Burdett.
Madam Chair, to the CEO, in terms of the money asked going forward, this project, have we had any improvement in office? This is the liquor pool, Timothy.
Through the chair, I didn't quite understand the question. Could you please?
Well, given that our funders out there are a bit nervous about contributing, where are we with it?
There's no further update on funding, except to say that we're still in the same position that we have been, that we are short on funds and we require significantly more than what council has committed today.
So through the chair, if I could just add to that. So in terms of the grant funding that we are seeking, at the moment, all our eggs are in one basket, and we know what that basket is. And so what we've been looking at is, okay, so what are some other sources of funding? Should that, for whatever reason, not come to fruition? So that's a piece of work that we're looking at around, well, what are the role, can council do within its own house? What can we seek by way of other grant fundings? Are there other mechanisms or structures that need to be looked at in order to deliver this project? Because we are, and Mr. White might be able to advise around the sum of money required, because the longer we take, the increase in cost is happening. So Andrew, if you want to comment on that, the current costs.
So we've had some work done following the feedback that we got from Sport Gisborne, some refinement of the plans, and we've also had an updated quantity survey estimate provided on those plans. And bear in mind that we're still at concept stage, we're not into developed or detailed design. We've seen an increase in the cost of the project, And a large part of that increase is a 16% inflationary increase since 2017. So we have talked about this in previous reports, and it's covered in this major projects report, that actually time is our enemy with this project. You know, if we're delaying for further years, then we can probably expect to see other inflationary changes that are potentially well beyond consumer price index inflation.
And
Thank you.
supplementary to that, Madam Chair, I wonder, for those of us who were sitting around the table many years ago before the wastewater plant was introduced, the whole community contributed by way of commitment via the rates. So when we actually came to build the wastewater plant, we had $7.5 million in the kitty. Would it be possible to give some thought to that?
To have a savings plan, is that what you say going
Well,
forward?
we spent
That's a
many a
finance
meeting trying to resolve how we were going to get the wastewater plant off the ground. And that's where we resolved. Every member of the community basically, in a sense, contributed. All of our communities contribute.
Yeah, so through the chair, that's exactly the work that needs to be done around how can we fund it if we are not going to get a substantial injection of funding. And then the other part to that is, so if we are to get a substantial injection of funding from a funder, what are the conditions that we need to do so in order to access that? So it's a piece of work that we are now progressing.
Thank you. I just had Councillor Cranston and then Councillor Dowsing. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on so long. I just wonder if there's any opportunity to reverse engineer it. I mean, at the moment, and right from the start, what has been holding it up is the number that we're trying to achieve, and that number's going up all the time, and it's a huge number. What, say we reverse engineer it by going to the funders and saying, well, what would you put into this project, getting a figure, and then seeing to what stage we could get it at that figure, rather than having this enormous number in front of us and not knowing whether we can achieve it, doing all this work all the time, which has been going on a decade, more than a decade. So, you know, could we have that conversation with the funders? Okay, what do you realistically think you could commit to this project? And then going back and saying, well, what could we achieve for that number? And it might be just stages of the Olympic pool development. It certainly probably wouldn't be the whole thing, but I just wondered, and that kind of relates to the design. You'd have to have the design so that it is very feasible, logical stages. Just another approach. I just wondered.
And through the chair, that discussion, Mr. White has had discussions along those lines with the funder. But if I point us back to our MOU around best for region outcomes, one of the key drivers around that was the significant investment into an Olympic pool complex, which would impact on future distribution. So it was how can we collaboratively work together, Gisborne District Council and ACT, in order to deliver these outcomes, the pool being one of them. And so there were those options that we looked at around releasing additional capital, but now they've made their announcement around a wellbeing budget. And so what does that actually mean for an investment into a swimming pool and our best for region work? So there are a lot of moving parts, but I guess my key concern is when Mr. White discussed the inflationary impact that's happening here, is that all eggs in one basket. Time is of essence here, so what are our other options that we can look at?
Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think to just make the point on that is that we modelled all our decisions for that project based on the availability of 2/3 funding essentially for that project, if not more. If we can't achieve that funding, then the question comes back to, should we fund it? And that's the reality that we would be in. So if we can't achieve that, if we can't achieve the level of funding that we made our decisions on, then that decision needs to come back to the table and be had again as to our appetite to fund it. And it may entirely change the scope of the project or the form of the project, but that is but it's almost a project reset. The question I had was around on page 77. and it's the piece on cultural impact assessment with the Ronga Whakaata needs to be progressed as part of the consent conditions before stage 2 injections can begin. We've obviously just this morning put in place our joint action plan with the Ronga Whakaata Iwi Trust, and I'd like to know how that is intended to be reported back to council.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, perhaps I can answer the first half of the question. So we have been meeting with Ronga Whakaata quite recently. I know it says due to progress in May. We've met with them most recently yesterday, and we have had quite a few bits of drafts of the cultural impact assessment through, which staff are actually working through at the moment, but we've made really good progress, and we had some more information through. So we're nearly complete in terms of that. In terms of the second half of the question, I'll leave that to Katie to answer.
Through the chair, so through the joint action plan, the approach has been with Ronga Whakaata Iwi Trust around getting some achievable goals over the next 12 months. So whether the MAI and the content is included around that action plan is what we will come back to council with, and how we work through that.
Just on that, I guess from my point of view, to give me clarity as a councillor on my decisions, I don't want an interpretation of Ronga Whakaata's desires. I want their desires forwarded to me as presented by them, and personal perspective. But I worry here that we're progressing another essentially another outfall into the ocean that later on may be challenged with MA. But that is the goal of the cultural impact assessment, and I can't wait to see the results of that.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Foster, and then...
Thank you. On page 76, cycling Tairawhiti, Rootney Road whānau friendly cycle route previously put on hold has been picked up again. Plan now involves updating the detailed business case to include feasibility investigations into east and west with simultaneous public consultation on these routes. So could I just get an update on that? Because...
So through you, Madam Chair, we have been discussing with the NZTA the delays to the Rootney Road cycleway and the issues that we have around the construction and the proposed stormwater upgrades that we have in train, and the delay that would be for that project. With NZTA, any funds, if we're looking to reallocate or do different parts of it at different stages, we have to update our business case that we have. We had a conference call with NZTA on Wednesday discussing what is the process for that. We outlined that our process for any changes in timeframes of delivery would have to come back through council, and it's a council decision. What we're doing is we're working through what are the feasible options going forward and what are our recommendations for the cycleway to connect through east and west. We'll be bringing those options back to this table for direction, which we will then take out to community consultation after that. But it's something that we need to work out what those options look like, given that the current proposal for Rootney Road was not something that the community was behind, and it was also something that the likes of waste management and our rubbish collection had issues with. There was problems with the design that it was proposed. So this is looking at new proposals and seeing which options we want to take forward for consultation.
So that could include extending it along Wainui Road, possibly Crawford Road into the inner harbour, that kind of route. Would that be an option?
There are a number of options that we're looking at that we'll bring back.
Thank you.
Non-committal.
Okay, Councillor Akuata Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in an overall major project space, I'm just, after, seeing the disappointment of a shade sale taken, I guess I'm wondering whether we are bringing the community along in these spaces in that sense that, again, mischief makers are out there with graffiti, and we saw the Statue of Woe even get tagged. So I just, when we're doing, and there's so much work going on in our region, and it's wonderful to see it with completion dates in hand, but is there more space to do some media comms just around that buy-in ownership, that this is our place, our region, and we're doing this, for us in that sense? Because I'm really aware of budgets and ensuring that we meet those budgets, and our ratepayer are always questioning in that space priorities, etc. So when we have stuff broken, taken, that costs. So I'm just really just, you know, in these spaces of wonderful aspirational hopes and dreams for our region, you know, are we bringing all people along so that we don't have unnecessary costs due to theft or damage? Again, it happens, I know, and I appreciate that we are working always to try and, for the whole region, make the best of it. But I just, in the comms delivery, marketing, and I guess putting it out there to the public community domain, is that, I know it's ongoing, but I just want to kind of force that we are trying to work, obviously with a time frame for Tuia, this commemorative space, but also for our region's growth and development. Infrastructure costs a lot of money. So I just was wondering about that, because having walked through the Lawson Field Theatre, seeing the work that's happened there, you know, there's a whole lot of wonderful things happening at the now. And, you know, it's always disappointing the sense that some people aren't on board, especially, you know. So just, are we on board with that space? Or could we do better?
So the shade sale issue, when that was taken, there was a lot of internal discussion around the approach that we take to raise awareness and concern of this in the community. And our decision was, actually, let's not do a negative approach to this. Let's try and get it replaced as soon as possible. If it gets removed, then we revisit our tactic here. But in comparison to all the collateral and display boards that are out there, number of people, number of issues that we've had in the community, one shade sale isn't a bad, I know, you know, it is bad, but it could have been worse. And so that to me suggests a sense of community ownership, because there are a number of, the signboards themselves, they haven't been tagged. They haven't, what are the maps, they haven't been damaged. So, so that signals that there is some form of ownership over it. In terms of our other, trying to get ownership, I mean, that's ultimately the focus of our communications approach. And so you would have seen, and this is just kind of moving and making a plug for the awesome work that our team have done in DrainWise, is that I think I looked last night, there's been 16,000 views of our 3Ps campaign, 450 odd shares. So that's the approach that we're taking to really get the community ownership as being engaged, having them input, you know, the cultural pride in place, as well as all tapping into the pulse of the community to take that ownership. And that's the approach that we're taking from a comms perspective.
Thank you, Madam CEO, because I think that's probably what I should have reworded it in a positive space, because that's what I feel. But I was always, you get people who ask you that space. So I just thank you. I appreciate your comments in that sense, because there is a lot of positivity out there. So yeah, kia ora.
Okay, if we have no other questions around the major report, Coral, did we have a move in a second? I moved it. Okay. If there are no other questions, I will put it to the table that we note the contents of our CEO's report. All in favour? Contrary carried. Thank you for that. We now move on to page 82, which is an update on the status of the Mangapoiki Lake. Dr. Cave, will you join us at the table? Moved by Councillor Dowsing, seconded by Councillor Wharehinga. We take the report as read. Do you have any questions of Dr. Cave? Larry.
First, could this be considered as a resource for the future?
Through Madam Chair, it is our largest lake now. It's a significant body of water. But I guess the critical point is that we need to ensure that the lake has longevity before we can consider it as any type of resource.
The other question is that any expense that's gone into the investigation so far looks to me like it's fallen on our side, even though there's Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Wairoa District Council borderline onto this. If it is identified as a resource and we've been funding the operation so far, would we make the decision to continue that? So when you fund something, you can consider it to be a part of the ownership of it for the region and for the landowners in that area.
I'm almost embarrassed to say that in actual fact, a significant proportion of the costs that have been incurred, and this is real costs as opposed to my time, have in actual fact been incurred by Hawke's Bay Regional Council. When this event happened, they delegated responsibility to us to deal with this because it's on our border. And in exchange for us doing quite a lot of the hands-on work, we encouraged them and they were quite happy to support us financially. So they covered quite a lot of the bills that have been going on up until now.
Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I was very interested actually in on page 85, number 7, it mentions consideration for the areas being given to planting of the dam itself with suitable Indigenous planting. Is that the catchment to allow for better collection of pure water into that dam? Does it take into account what biodiversity goals are involved in that as well?
It's all part of the risk mitigation. At this stage, it's actually the landslide debris that's gone down and making sure that if you have vegetation on it which is suitable, there is adjacent seed sources, that it will assist binding those soils together, so will help ensure the stability of the landslide dam. Planting around the margins of the lake, the riparian margins, is a separate issue. Paparatu Station has already got some funding through the ECFP grant scheme to plant the essentially the northern and the western side of the lake, and Mangapoiki Station has also got some funding through the same scheme to do some additional planting on some of their land there as well on the margins. Beyond that, it is really a question of having the stakeholders come together to decide what we want to do going forward, to actually have a plan that everybody can share the vision and essentially a story about how this lake will look in 5 years' time.
I think it presents an exciting opportunity in that space, so I'd like to see Council have an opportunity to discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So let's go. We've got a mover and a seconder. Thank you for the thorough report. It's a very interesting agenda item. So councillors, all in favour, contrary, carried. So I'm just going to, I have had a few councillors that asked if we could move our planned fees and charges workshop to finance. So if there are no major objections from the table, I recommend that we move this workshop to finance. Is everyone happy with that? Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our public agenda today. I thank staff for the thorough reports we've received today. I thank the public that watched us online, but I now move that we go into public excluded. Seconded by Councillor Burdett. All in favour?